Hello, this is the RPG Pundit, the final boss in internet shitlords. I hope that there isn't too much sound of the storm happening outside the window here. It's just that how do you put it, the weather here had been extremely nice for the last couple of days. Yesterday was 28 degrees, which for those of you who use Fahrenheit is, pretty hot summer weather, even though we're in the middle of winter still. Well, late winter. And now today, of course, it broke into a storm. But anyways, hopefully that it won't make too much of a barrier to being able to hear me. Today, first of all, I want to point out this is the Invisible College hardcover. You'll be hearing more about this in the near future. It came out right now. I mean, well, it came out a little while ago, but I only just got it now. It's beautiful, super dense. Yeah, I'll be doing videos where I'll be showing it off, of course. As you guys know, I've been doing a series of review videos where I'm going step by step through this massive 430-page book. Like, look at how much thicker it is in comparison to Lion and Dragon, right? So. So we'll be doing more of that later. But today, I had to talk to you about something. I swear to God, I don't know how I'm even going to phrase this in the video name, because I think most people are not going to be able to believe this is real. They're going to look at this title and go, no, this is just some parody. This is bullshit. The RPG Pundit made this up. I swear to God, everything I'm going to tell you right now is true. Okay, so for starters, you guys if you've looked at my videos before, you'll have seen that I did a video called, I think it was called the +1 Combat Wheelchair of Representation, where I explain about the magic combat wheelchair that was created for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. That at first it was a third-party product, but then got adopted into actual canon, let's say. It was made part of the mainstream. And that's why, from that point on, forever from now on, you saw it in the current book, Strixhaven, you saw it in Ravenloft, you saw it in Tasha's Cauldron, you saw it in, no, not Tasha's Cauldron, in Candlekeep. And you're going to see it in every product going forward. In some place, there's going to be art, probably multiple pieces of art, featuring D&D adventurers going around in magic wheelchairs. Because that's diversity. Right, diversity means an inordinate amount of people getting crippled, apparently. So this is the end game of diversity. Ironic but true. There we are. And that in itself was just so absurd. I'm not going to continue to harp on about that. You could go back and look at that video. Go through my video, scroll there, and find +1 Combat Wheelchair of Representation. I think that was what the title. And hear about all the stupid details of it, okay? But the thing is, the SJWs doubled down, right? They saw the success of the combat wheelchair and they decided to up the ante, right? The same person who made the combat wheelchair of representation has now decided to expand on that, and in part of that expansion has made a number of new subclasses, all of which are kind of stupid. But I'm going to focus on one, which is honestly the dumbest one, right? And also in some ways the most telling one. It's very interesting. And that is the Chronic-Fatigue Barbarian, okay? I know how this sounds. It sounds like I'm making this up, but we live in an age where parody is indistinguishable from leftism, right? There's no barrier anymore between the two things, right? You can't think of, the Babylon Bee, one of the funniest websites on the internet, is a parody website that makes fun of politics and culture in general. Also, obviously, takes a lot of opportunities to make fun of the SJWs and political correct culture. But they ran into some real problems in that there's a number of articles they made, the headlines or the content of which later on just became actual things that SJWs believe, right? And there are also things that SJWs were actually doing in the world that were so absurd that they outshone any Babylon Bee parody. So eventually they made a website called Not the Bee, which is exactly like the Babylon Bee, except it posts articles that they didn't think of, but rather stuff that people have actually been doing, right, in the cultural Marxist left. And it's all insane, right? And one is as funny as the other, right? There's no, like, whether you make up a parody, think of the dumbest possible thing you can imagine, and frankly, the wheelchair-bound Chronic-Fatigue Barbarian is about the dumbest thing I can think of with relation to D&D classes, right? You're going to name a D&D class. And you know, it can't match what they come up with, right? So, the Chronic-Fatigue Barbarian, the concept behind it is pretty self-explanatory, right? It's a barbarian who's become really tired and weakened, and so they're wheelchair-bound, right? Like as if they had chronic fatigue syndrome. And that in itself is just kind of ridiculous, right? It's it's just such an absurd concept in general. You know, and I will point out, as I did in the first video, in the one about the wheelchair itself, is that, I mean, in and of itself, if you're playing in a magical setting, the problem isn't that the wheelchair is unrealistic, in quotes. It would be unrealistic in Lion and Dragon, for example, because realistically, you couldn't make that kind of wheelchair in the real Middle Ages, right? There's just no way. So that would be unrealistic. But in the Forgotten Realms, yeah, you could have it. It would be stupid still, because you could also just regenerate people's limbs, right? So, like, any society that's become sufficiently magical, so that's sufficiently powerful in magic to create the combat wheelchair of representation, is also probably sufficiently magically powerful that it could just heal what is wrong, right? But that wouldn't fit. That wouldn't fit the agenda. The agenda is what they call diversity, which is actually just to tick off quota, to tick off little markers of different types of what they consider oppressed groups, and make sure that those are present. Right now, if you had, for example, a room with 20 people that were 20 wheelchair dependent people, and let's say they were all black women in wheelchairs, that they would call that a diverse room. Right? There's nothing diverse about it. Let's say they all vote Democrat. They're all the same age. They're all millennials, right? That to them is diversity. That is diversity being achieved. It's so, you know, it's a completely politically motivated application to a game setting, right? But here it's just like the Chronic-Fatigue Barbarian is, I think, meant to be. It's so hard to pin it down, but it's I think it's meant to be an intentional deconstruction, or in this case a subversion, let's say, of the idea of the barbarian being strong and self-reliant, being constantly energetic and vigorous, right? Being a physically based character, you know. So when you suddenly have this image of, you know, Arnold Schwarzenegger circa 1981 bound in a wheelchair and feeling really tired, you know, that's a subversion of an element that is considered of value in Western culture, and therefore a success for the people that want to destroy Western culture. So that's the point of it. But it gets funnier, because you know, what do you do with a wheelchair-bound, really tired barbarian? Well, the answer that they gave to it is give them psychic powers. So I'm sorry, the Chronic-Fatigue Barbarian has psychic abilities that emerge out of their tiredness, I guess. But they aren't just any psychic abilities. Not like telekinesis or, you know, reading people's minds. No. All of the powers that they give the Chronic-Fatigue Barbarian are the power of spreading fatigue to others in some way or another, right? To make people tired, exhausted, feel pain, feel uncomfortable, etc. Which is, ironically, a massive self-own, right? Because I'm not going to deny that there can be real medical diagnoses of something like maybe chronic fatigue syndrome or myalgia. Just like, for example, there's unquestionably autism is real, right? Like that is something that can really be diagnosed by a medical professional. It can be a real medical complex. But there's also the fact, just like there's all kinds of people on the internet mainly who self-diagnose as being autistic without consulting any medical professional. They just decide they are because they want an excuse to be able to act like assholes because they imagine that autism would be something that would give them that excuse, right? Those people who are basically scum, right? They use that disease as an excuse to behave badly. And likewise, with something like chronic fatigue or fibromyalgia, those sorts of things, there are tons of people that have self-diagnosed themselves as that and do this, claim to have these fatigue-based syndromes as an excuse to be able to be an emotional drain on everybody around them. Because if you've been around anyone who has ever claimed to have a self-diagnosed fatigue-based disease, right? These are basically what you could call emotional vampires, right? They're people who are constantly needing all the attention to be on them, all the sympathy to be on them, right? And just being around them makes you tired because they keep talking about how tired they are. They keep talking about how poor little me, right? And this whole element of acting like a helpless victim, and at the same time making it very clear that they get to be victims forever, right? And they get to be, and they get to have you have to do anything they tell you because of their poor little syndromes, right? Then those people are emotional vampires, and they have the psychic power to make you feel tired too, right? Just by being around them, which is why you eventually don't want to be around them. And here, in what like if somebody were making a character class to make fun of the type of people who like the combat wheelchair, they would have made the Chronic-Fatigue Barbarian. But no, the person who made the combat wheelchair made the Chronic-Fatigue Barbarian. And if I'm not mistaken, I have heard, now I might be wrong on this, I'm willing to state that this might not be accurate, but what I have heard multiple times from different sources is that the creator of the combat wheelchair is themselves someone who is semi-wheelchair bound on the basis of a self-diagnosis, right? So in fact, this might be a massive self-own to themselves personally too, right? Like showing a character who's basically just tired and therefore wants to be in a wheelchair, and then is able to psychically transmit that exhaustion to everybody around them. And that's their idea of a fun D&D character to play. That's what they want you to play forever, right? That's what they want to impose on your parties. That's what they consider D&D is for. D&D isn't actually about having a good time. D&D is about indoctrinating you in whatever is the current doctrine of the radical SJW left. That's what they want to impose, right? And so this is all hilarious up until you realize that's their vision of a future, right? Is a wheelchair wheel stepping on your neck forever. That's what they want. That's why they're going to the first time Wizards of the Coast makes a book that doesn't have a wheelchair in it from now on, they're going to demand blood and people will be fired over it, right? That's the way that these people have become, and their attitude and their agenda to destroy gaming and Western values and the Western world and Western civilization. People sometimes make fun of me that, you're talking about an elf game and you're talking about the end of civilization. No, these things are all connected, because the way you destroy civilization isn't by some kind of an invasion or even dropping an atomic bomb, right? You could drop a nuke in New York City, civilization wouldn't be over. But if you deconstruct every element of civilization, you indoctrinate every generation of children to hate their own culture, to hate every value, like the idea of valuing heroism, right? Heroism is something that comes from our earliest human feelings, right? It's something that is fundamental to all human beings all over the world, all races, all colors, all, both genders, all gender identities, whatever you want to call it, right? There is something inherent, it's biological pretty much, that we value the idea of heroism and we understand what is and is not heroism, right? And one of the key elements of heroism is actually the overcoming of adversity or disadvantage. And so this is also, to me, one of the most horrifying parts of all of these notions. The magical wheelchair of representation, the Chronic-Fatigue Barbarian. We've got a meatball there. She's up to something. All right, sorry. The Chronic-Fatigue Barbarian. All of these. I'm going to move this over here before there's some kind of accident. All of these characters are an attempt to overthrow that notion of heroism and of overcoming adversity. Because if they were an idea that was just about like presenting a character that has a disadvantage, has a flaw. In my games, I love having characters have flaws, and I love having... Jesus Christ, this cat's driving me nuts. I'm in danger of losing my coffee. All right. Hey, Meatball, can you please stop interrupting my video? Can you do that, please? God damn it, Meatball. Anyway, look, where was I? Right. In a game, having a character that has a disadvantage can be really cool, right? Because that can then become a fundamental part of their story about how they have to face the difficulties of that disadvantage and then overcome the adversities of that disadvantage to be a hero even so, and to actually accomplish great things, right? And to maybe be to triumph and overcome their own limitations. That's the heroic story in its most basic form, right? So if you have a character that loses an arm in a fight in a game of Lion and Dragon, where with the critical rules being what they are, it's completely possible for you to have a character who loses an arm. You could say, well, okay, that's it, the character retires. Or you could say, well, I'm going to keep going, and see what that does to the character and see how they can adapt and if they can still end up doing something meaningful and heroic. And then that becomes a huge part of the story. It becomes super interesting. And it's the same with all types of disadvantages, right? So you have this, it's in all elements of all stories of throughout cultures, all throughout history, this idea of overcoming adversity that can be from characters that have physical adversities, right? Everything from the idea of David and Goliath, right? The young boy versus the giant, right? Which repeats itself over and over. Jack and the Beanstalk, right? It's David and Goliath also, right? It's the same myth. Or elements of class, right? The notion of Joan of Arc, the little peasant girl who ends up leading an army to save her country, right? This is that actually really happened, right? But life's history becomes the food for myth, right? So these whether the adversity is from gender, class, whether it's from poverty, from physical disadvantages, from injuries or illnesses, all of those things, right? Those are all cool. They're all impressive when you play them through, when you actually make them mean something, right? The idea of a character being disabled is not a bad thing at all, right? If you had in real history, in real, pre-medieval history in this case, you have the character of Ivar the Boneless, which I talked about in the previous video. He was an absolute badass. And he literally had like a chariot and also a kind of horse harness that he used to go in battle because he was paraplegic by all, or in some other way disabled so that he couldn't walk, right? But he had to go fight because a Viking king can't be a king of the Vikings if he can't fight, right? They would never allow somebody to stay as the ruler if they weren't capable of going and leading the men into battle. And he did that. And he did it apparently to the terror of everybody around him. He was fantastically capable because he was also apparently super smart. So this is something that is the very fuel for myth and for legend. But instead, these morons, right, the SJWs, their idea of equity is fundamental to say, no, that part of human nature, that we value that's wrong. That's not what we should be doing, right? What we should be doing is recognizing diversity, recognizing that everybody as they are should get an equity of outcome, which means nobody has to make any effort to change. Nobody has to make any effort to overcome themselves, right? The point in any story of myth and legend, or in any historical chronicle of somebody having a disadvantage, is the idea to see will they be able to triumph over it, or will it defeat them or consume them or turn them evil, or will they overcome it? Will they overcome their disadvantages and do something of meaning, right? But for SJWs, that's not the story. For the SJWs, the story is this person is in a wheelchair. That's the story. That's the whole story. Nothing else has to be done about it. Like the fact that you show the character in the wheelchair is already the story, and it's already the accomplishment of everything they want. That's their narrative. And so then the person with the wheelchair, of course, cannot be discriminated against because equity of outcome, right? So there can be no disadvantage whatsoever to being on the wheelchair. There can be no disadvantage whatsoever to having a barbarian with chronic fatigue who's in a wheelchair, right? And so you lose all the potential, right? There's the SJWs say, oh, well, in a medieval setting, women will be disadvantaged. Yes, women will be disadvantaged in a medieval setting. That would make playing a female character extra interesting, right? But instead, their idea is to say, no, let's just say women are, even though it wasn't like this, let's say women are exactly just the same as men, treated the same. We take away everything that makes it authentic and also everything that would make it especially interesting to play someone in that position, And the same thing with class, the same thing with race, the same thing with physical ability or disability, until what you end up having is adventures where characters go to the prom, like in the latest D&D book that is coming out now, Strixhaven, right? That's the adventure. You're in a college, you're having hijinks, your life's a hot mess, and you're going to the prom. Because even the idea of adventuring itself is an overcoming of adversity. So you shouldn't be allowed to adventure, right? That's the goal of what these people are trying to accomplish with these products. So it's hilarious and laughable and mockable until you realize how dangerous it will be if they succeed, if they create the world they want, which is a world where nobody will be allowed to overcome themselves, because that would make them unequal, and that would mean that they were bigoted if they overcame themselves. So it's the world of Harrison Bergeron. Never mind 1984. These guys looked at Harrison Bergeron and took that story as an instruction manual to say that, well, if one person can dance better than another person, we're going to need to put a spike in their knee so they can't dance anymore, because if they can do it, they're bigoted, right? It's an unfair privilege that they have better dancing ability. That's going to be the end result of all this. So, yeah, don't buy D&D's products anymore. That's all. It's just you've got to do this because that they've released the Chronic-Fatigue Barbarian. You know that in the very next book there's going to be a piece of art of a barbarian in a wheelchair using his psychic power to make other people feel exhausted, right? Using his vampiric psychic powers to drain the life out of everyone else, which is what the SJWs are draining the life out of D&D, right? And as long as Wizards of the Coast doesn't have a Thermidorian reaction, we just have to not buy anything of theirs, right? And not see that as the hobby. The hobby has to be games made by people who don't despise us and who don't want to destroy the concept of heroism itself, you know? I guess that's it for today. If you like this video, please share it anywhere you think people will find it useful, where you think people need to hear it, and where you think people are going to hate it. And like the video, please. And if you haven't already, please subscribe. By subscribing, you will, well, you'll be able to hit the notification bell, and you won't miss any of my videos. And if you get to, we're going to get very soon to 4,000 subscribers, and when we do, I'm going to do a live stream here. So that's something. And if you want to support me, besides all of those things, which are great, and all those things I really encourage you to do, you could just throw money at me via Patreon. There's a Patreon link in my description below. But what I would recommend is that you pick up my products, right? My games and my RPG Pundit Presents PDF series, 105 issues of those. They vary, you know, like my cheapest product I think is like 99 cents, and my most expensive one is like $50, $60, something like that, which is the Invisible College in hardcover, 55 I think it is. But you can also get the Invisible College in paperback, right, in soft cover for I think $33 or something. So, so you know, like none of them are super expensive, but you're getting products that are actually meant to be played, that are actually meant to be used in gaming, not for virtue signaling, not as a collectible item to put up on your shelf, but for you to play with them and to use them any way you want to. They're not mandating what your group has to do or how you have to behave or what political dictates you must obey. Right? They're there for you to game with, for you to tear apart and change all you want, for you to mix up with every other product in the OSR. And they're full of good, exciting stuff that you can really use in games, right? So pick up some of my products: World of the Last Sun, Lion and Dragon, The Invisible College, Star Adventure, Dark Albion, Cults of Chaos, or any of my RPG Pundit Presents series. And it's like you're buying me a coffee or a meal or what have you, and yet you're getting something for yourself too. And I like that, and I trust you will too. So thank you very much. Currently smoking Lorenzetti Oversize plus Argento Natural.